Hello, in this video I want to have a look at Adelaide, South Australia, the capital city of the state of South Australia. Many other connections, especially regarding Oddfellows, but I won't go into those in this video, but Adelaide, it's also referred to as the city of churches. And so with the street plan and with, well, especially I'm going to focus on the key church here, and we'll look at that in a little while. But in this video I would and do it a little bit differently, and so rather than look at the city individually, I'm going to use previous graphics and to show how not just the city itself, but show how it connects with previous areas I've gone into, and to show how it's a global system. It's and also a system that goes back throughout history. But Colonel William Light, the city plan was called Light's Vision. Most sources, literature will say that Adelaide and Perth, which I just covered in the previous video, were a departure from the Macquarie plan, but nothing can be further from the truth. They're simply a redrawing of the same system, just slightly changed, but always the same thing happening within there. So you can even see the measurements of the streets and roads in this one, and I'll examine it in a moment. But this is the main part of the city, and we're going to focus on that. And so we have essentially all the streets are defined by three measures: 99 feet, 132 feet, or 62 feet, and this runs throughout. And now each one of those are very important. They connect to the Rathbone chain and the Gunther's chain in this same hermetic system, which goes back thousands of years and across the world, across cultures which are supposedly separate, but that's just nonsense, because in a world, in a random world, these things just would not happen, and yet they happen over and over and over again. But key point is that we also have these 5 park areas. So, but of all of the allotments, 32 of these allotments were given to these 5 parks. 32 being, again, so a theme that carries throughout. And towards the end, I'm going to bring in South Africa and the Voortrekker Monument, but this 32 sun rays around the 33rd central point is a theme, Portoland mapping as well. But also previously I've gone into Astana and the Pyramid of Peace in Astana, and also this 32 rays around the central point, Norman Foster being the architect there. He's the currently speaking the leading practitioner of his craft in regards to major architecture and city designs. And first we'll start with the 66 feet and look at that, as I've already got all the cards and gone into that in a few other videos. Now, to begin with, the speed of the solar system around the galactic core, and it's the way it moves up and down, and it's heading towards Hercules Lambda. The links regarding Hercules and the symbolism, the Dorian invasion in ancient world, and the connections, the keystone connections. But 66 feet will also be the key. It's also referred to among surveyors as the Gunther's chain, and it's usually credit goes to Edmund Gunther. He was an astronomer, mathematician, geometer, and clergyman. In other words, he was an occultist, and he was also at least published. So he essentially made the first recognized slide rule. He's published work on the sextant and the crossbar, so especially tools of measurement and observation in regards to survey and to astronomy. You know, you couldn't get closer to this whole area if you tried. But however, Edmund Gunther did not invent these, and so we again, across the ancient world, across supposedly separate cultures, across the globe, across time, across religions, this same, and to this present day to the ancient times, the use of 66 feet is a constant, and it's just, you know, it's too many to go into individually. But just that this concept of the Gunther's chain being new, it's bollocks. It's a fundamental still. For instance, that last picture was from the Indianapolis Scottish Rite Cathedral. 66 feet and the number 66, so 66 and 792. They are key harmonic numbers. They unify sun, earth, moon, and stars, the temple of man, as it could be labelled, which is New Jerusalem, or the Ark of Utnapishtim, or the Tower of Babel. But not just the size, but also the weight and the speed of the earth around the sun. It's just astonishing. It's a beautiful system, and it's why the power of his system is with this very small group of numbers, this very small group of measures. You the 7 liberal arts, especially the quadrivium, astronomy, music, geometry, and arithmetic, harmonise around that. And that's, again, that's the beauty of this system. With within a very small band, you encode seemingly infinite amount of knowledge, which has been passed on through mythology, through symbolism, so many other things. Again, these are all testable, measurable things, well within acceptable margins of error. People might try and not nitpick that it's outside of what the first page search on Google shows. Well, that's to show a misunderstanding of the way measures work, because especially there's always an elasticity built into it. Acceptable margin of errors has to be understood, but also 66 feet standard street width, not just in Adelaide, but well, again, across the world. Places like Canada some cities began with 66 feet, others were retrofitted to meet this point. The standard street footpath or sidewalk would be 12 feet, so you get creating a 7-11 ratio between the road, full road, and the carriageway, which gives us 7, and so 11 over 7 is half pi. Again, that's in the real working world, not on theoretical paper, but in the real working world, 7 over 11 or 22 over 7 as pi is more than acceptable. Especially the links to Freemasons, but also, for instance, Melancholia 1 by Albrecht Dürer, one of the most celebrated, most well-known pieces of esoteric art, has this ratio in there. And again, so he's just one of these key people. But I've also previously mentioned Anish Kapoor, not just the Cloud Gates installation in Chicago, which again has all the other lovely numbers which are just repeated over and over throughout it. So I also mentioned in regards to 377, which is an important point, especially to the Voortrekker Monument and to Sydney and so many other places. IMP, the Louvre Pyramid, same thing's happening there. It's a scale model of the Great Pyramid of Giza, which connects us. So 5, golden number, the divine proportion. It's throughout nature, from sunflowers to also the light spectrum, as I found out a few days ago. I can't pronounce his channel, but anyway, 7 over 11 is also a beautiful way of encoding knowledge regarding squaring the circle, but also the size of the Earth and the Moon and this ratio that they have between them, which is essentially 27.3% something, which I'd speak a lot about as well. Carl Jung and how talked about this particular construction, but it's in the Great Pyramid, it's in Stonehenge, it's in so many places across cultures, across time. It's just astounding how any notion of coincidence or this idea of diffusionist culture. So either it's, as Jung might have suggested, in deep inside our psyche, like built into our DNA, or it's part of a legacy of a previous global culture. So either way, it's one of these two very important things. But again, so here we see just a animation I've made for another video, but we see how the proportions of a Great Pyramid encode this system of knowledge: sun, earth and moon, but especially this one, very obvious connection to the ratio of the earth and the moon, and this particular geometry and these particular numbers, which are encoded more than likely in the very streets you walk on, in the size of your block, in the major public buildings in your city. And it's it's quite everywhere. But anyway, back to Perth, to Adelaide, capital of South Australia, the city of churches, and we're going to have a look at the main cathedral, as is always the case, at least in Australia, but so many other parts of the world. The major cathedral is another example of this. So it's not just the streets, it's also the major public buildings. St. Peter's Cathedral, Anglican Cathedral, has many connections, but even like, for instance, just like on the Wikipedia search, if you just want to do a quick one, but also mentions how the governor of South Australia was a Mason. This particular cathedral was opened with full Masonic honours. So again, just like as a superficial reference, but the cathedral itself, 203 feet long. Now, I don't understand the importance of 203 feet, but I'm certain that it is an important esoteric piece of knowledge, but it's also, so the Golden Number-Divine, we see the gateway 203 feet. Back to Norman Foster and Astana, the Pyramid of Peace and Reconciliation, which had that 32-33 thing. 203 feet high and 203 feet wide. It's a true pyramid. The main mosque in Astana, 203 feet high, the minarets, but the tower itself, the dome, has again this 132 feet, just as in Adelaide. The London Fire Memorial, 203 feet from the site of the fire, 203 feet high, back to the minarets again. So in going on 800 years old in Afghanistan, Soviet Russia, the Motherland Memorial in the Ukraine, amongst all the other measures incorporated into this structure as well, at 203 feet. The St. Jacques Tower, again, going on, approaching 500 years old, 203 feet. The Wellington Monument, Phoenix Park in Dublin, Phoenix Park, 203 feet again. And as I've touched on, the Voortrekker Monument in South Africa, which will sort of connect very strongly with Adelaide and the focus I have now, 203 feet high, again 32 over 33 in the centre, plus all the other measurements, and we'll examine them in the centre in a moment. Back to St. Peter's Cathedral in Adelaide, 203 feet long, but 168 feet high. So in the Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, but in the Doric and the Cremona scale, which we're going to have a look at those now, rather than and now I'm going to eliminate a few, and just so we can see the main important ones. Although there's much other information with all these other numbers, but I just, you could go on for hours and hours on it. And rather than make a set of individual graphics for St. Peter's Cathedral in Adelaide, I'm just going to use some stuff I've made on Disney and his use in Disneyland, Disney World, etc., and the castles there. But of course, Club 33 at Disney, Walt Disney himself, Order of the Mole, very strong. Well, you can even see it's no secret. It's not making this up. It's not even the Masonic Stamp Club honours him in respect to his connections. Also, the Disney logo references to Phi, the golden ratio, and the symbols. Both variations of the symbols are there in the Disney logo. But begin with Tokyo Disney, because this particular castle is 168 feet high, just the same height as St. Peter's Cathedral in Adelaide. And again, so we'll see. So it's sun, earth, and moon. Again, the Doric comes in, and Egyptian royal miles describing the moon. Again, across in alchemy, in Eastern tradition regarding chakras, in geometry, the International Standard, there was a book about how a series of magazines, which was published in regards to how the Great Pyramid has such a strong influence on weights and measures. The 24 hours a day, the beautiful arithmetic of this across dimensions, time, and so many other things. The divisions of time, but also this recurring theme of the clock and the compass and the calendar and the great year. Music as well. So Math Magic Land, excellent little video to watch in by Disney. But also, again, back to the golden ratio, the Fibonacci spiral, which again mentioned in Math Magic Land, which will bring us back to connections again over and over. So the Astana Pyramid has 5 proportions in it. The roads again of Macquarie, and again all other parts of the world, the architecture of I.M. Pei, the artwork of Anish Kapoor, the artwork of Albrecht Dürer, they all continue throughout this. So astronomy, music, arithmetic, and geometry. So again, these same particular numbers are very specifically chosen, connecting to, well, for instance, the compass again. It's just a recurring theme. And so really, if you study one of these particular areas, now Disneyland, it's a fun park, you'd think there's nothing in there, but no, as you can see, there are very strong connections to it, measurable connecictions to it. Rosicrucianism, for instance, is another one of these esoteric groups. So I just generally speak of Freemasonry, but you have Oddfellows, Rosicrucians, in recent times, well, there are many other groups. So it's under the general banner of Freemasons and esoteric or occult. But even, for instance, the Mayans, the Bible and the description of New Jerusalem. New Jerusalem is a Salamis stone in that it's a conversion tool for systems of measure. Bode's law, which describes the relationship between the planets, again is encompassed in this particular system. The dimensions of the sun, the earth, proportions of distance. It's a beautiful harmonic system, and in a chaotic, random world which is so much pushed by the mainstream, this would not happen, but it happens over and over and over again. It's clear, it's real, it's measurable, it's testable. It's encoded in ancient texts, ancient sculptures, ancient artworks, sacred architecture going back, yes, to the beginning of time. Stonehenge, you could, the Parthenon, all these other places are all part of this continuing system which carries on and on. And Shanghai Disney, so that's 196 feet, which is 168 Cremona feet. Well, you know, it's sort of just everything meshes back into each other. And now we'll look at the Adelaide street plan, and the main streets of Adelaide are 132 feet, which is 66 times 2, or 2 Gunther's chain. Now I'll do a direct comparison to the Voortrekker Monument, which I've touched on earlier, and see how both in street plans but also in monumental design the same pattern is happening. The Voortrekker Monument, the architect was Gerard Modic, and we'll have a look, especially with recent videos in Australia, exactly the same pattern, same things happening here. For instance, connections to New Jerusalem, and by default connections to the Ark of Utnapishtim, Tower of Babel as well, or Noah's Ark as well, because it's, even though it's not a cube, the same thing's happening. 528 connecting to 32 and 33 through weights and measures, as well as Phi and Pi as well, we touched on, especially in regards to 66 feet and how that particular street design includes Pi and Phi. Once more, dimensions of the Earth will be connected here, especially through the long foot, but also Sun, Earth and Moon. Harmony points where different scales of measurement will come together to describe all these, well, the Sun, Earth and Moon, also the stars in harmonious points. Also, just a further look, you see how it just continues to break down. It's a beautiful system. For instance, canonical cubits will also connect in there. Even the use of 88 piano keys, recently 88 constellations by definition, but again, this is just an example of how this ancient pattern is continuing even into the modern sciences. They love this system. The people at the Bureau of Weights and Standards are esotericians, without a doubt. But the Voortrekker Monument itself, so we have this lattice work on the outside, but also the bull. For instance, in Winnipeg, they use the bison, which is a local animal. Here we see the Cape buffalo, but they are references to the Lamassu and to the bull and to well, the 4 cardinal points as well. So it's basically it's the same pattern. It's just been slightly redesigned to match the local animal, but the same exact sort of pattern, the same symbolism happens again and again. The lattice work itself has well, what's just widely defined as what's called key points of geometry, 6/5, the Maltese cross, and all these other points going on. Now, the building itself is interesting because it was designed as a monument to the victory of the Dutch and the settlers there in South Africa over the native peoples. Yet, so you'd think it'd be European inspired, but it's actually Egyptian inspired. The sphinxes and the obelisks were part of the original plan, had to be removed because there was something of an outcry regarding to this very non-European symbolism for a European monument. Another little, well, a very important point about it is that there's a hole in the roof there which is astronomically aligned, so that on a certain day, which is the day of the victory of the Boers, a beam of light will pass through this hole in the floor, and then will come down onto the cenotaph or the tomb underneath. And on that day, the cenotaph will be a ray of sunlight will beam through and illuminate that particular monument. As I mentioned at the beginning, I talked about this 32/33 and how that's defined within the Voortrekker Monument itself, and how it goes to Astana, and well, any country you want to name that has this particular architecture and these very specific buildings.
There's a lot of very important symbolism in this. So it also has many connections to, well, especially to Australia, such as the Shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne. But so we have 32 sun rays. This double chevron is the Egyptian hieroglyph for water. The Egyptian creation myth of the Ben stone coming out of the primordial waters is the direct inspiration for this. It's not even hidden. It's part basically of the literature and the other people who have looked into the origins and the meaning of this. So we have 32, well, the 32 wheel sun ray around the outside, which also encode the double chevron for water, and the 33rd ray on a very specific day will pass through to illuminate the cenotaph underneath. Now, even the design of a roof to have this hole in the center is a symbol of Aten as well. So it's again another connection to ancient Egypt, to ancient symbolism, ancient weights and measures. It just carries on and on. There's sacred geometry built into the pattern, the use of Cape Buffalo, guarding the doorways, as well in, for instance, Babylonian times, the Lamassu and guardian, even like in Babylonian columns would have a bull on top, or just the standard of the two bulls guarding the temple. The Egyptians would typically have a sphinx, but sphinxes were actually part of the original design, and again were removed because the public complained that it was overly Egyptian and had no connection to the supposed meaning of this particular memorial. From this part of a building, if we were to look up and measure, we'd also get the 135 feet high, which is the equivalent of 550 Royal Egyptian palms, while the monument itself has 377 steps leading up to it. Even the breakdown of a number the number of steps, for instance, 169, 13 squared. There's a whole bunch of other things going on there, but that's too much foot detail for the moment. But this is relevant because, well, as recent videos, this system of 55, so 5,500, 550, and 377 is one that's carried through Sydney and especially connected to Masonic connections very strongly, such as the A&P building, etc. But the recently demolished in the Royal Botanic Gardens, the tropical garden, the pyramid itself had the same 55 symbolism going throughout, but which of course will lead us back to Pyramid of Peace and Reconciliation in Astana. Each one of the smaller triangular sections has 55 nodes, while that pattern itself, although not literally because it's hollow on the inside, but if you were to build a structure that it would require 55 smaller pyramids to fill out this structure. So on both a literal level and a symbolic level, this connection carries through and joins up all these supposedly unconnected structures. And of course the outside of a temple is 550 ionic palms wide, so 550 ionic palms on the outside, while on the inside it's 550 Royal Egyptian palms. 55 triangular numbers that attract us, but also, well, the 10th triangular, 5 plus 5 is 10. It's a nice little tie-in, but more importantly to the Fibonacci series, the divine proportion, and Phi. But also the breakdown of those numbers will give us back to the usual suspects, astronomical, geometric, and 108. Another key important point is that if you were to measure a floor, the width is 27.33 yards or 82 feet. 27.3 is a number that will harmonize, unify the sun, the earth, and the moon, not by measurement systems of man, but by natural ratios. For instance, as sidereal orbit of the moon, 27.3 days. The moon orbits its axis 27.3 days, 27.3% the size of the earth. The sun itself has a rotation period of 27.3 days, and this continues on and on. But that would, the 82 feet is also 109.33 span, so between 109 and 103 it also create a harmony of scales between the sun, the earth, and the moon. This same pattern of course can be seen again in Sydney, and well, just one example, the Sydney Harbour Bridge, where on the ionic scale this time it's 27.3, the width of the abutments.
So again, you have this harmony point now. Also, so the Moon orbits the Earth at the Barry Center 27.3% below the surface of the Earth, or 5,000 kilometers. This is an ingenious system, an ingenious method showing the harmony between natural scales, not man-made scales. But we did 66, 132, but the third and final main standard street width of Adelaide is 99 feet or 33 yards or 66 cubits coincidentally. But in Melbourne, capital city of Victoria in Australia, Robert Hoddle's plan for Melbourne, eventually it was decided to have 99 feet wide streets, 99 feet wide, but also 33 feet wide lanes. Shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne, just like the Voortrekker Monument, has an aperture in the roof, and on a very particular day, this day being the 11th of the 11th at 11 a.m, because it's World War I memorial, a single beam of light will shine in and highlight the cenotaph. Symbols of sacrifice. These are monuments. These are not temples, palaces to homes. These are built for major public significance. But that's not the only connection call. We have a fusion of the Parthenon and the tomb of Mausoleum, Doric, Ionic and Corinthian order infrastructure, columns on the inside, but the cenotaph on the outside, 41 feet or 27.33 cubits, which is going to give you exactly the same system as what's happening in the Voortrekker Monument. So Adelaide is just another example of a recent video. Perth, Sydney, Melbourne. You could also do it on Hobart, Brisbane, or Darwin, the other major cities of Australia, and then directly link these cities to other monuments, other cities around the world, other very important memorials, but also these. So, for instance, the Voortrekker Monument, the architect Gerard Modik, he studied ancient Egyptian architecture. The architects behind this are recreating very ancient temple designs, very ancient systems. This is not a modern system. It predates, it goes back to the beginnings of recorded history, and that Sumer, Egypt and the Indus all just sort of popped up out of nowhere at the same time. Also is another example of very strong evidence of a civilization before this time. The current model of history it cannot stand the test of measurement. The Hermetic Code can be found in the computer age, in the industrial age, the pre-industrial age, going back to the most ancient of ancient structures, the Great Pyramid, the stone circles of Britain. They all have this, and it's in deeper and deeper layers it goes through. It really can't be dismissed. And the 7 liberal arts, especially the quadrivium, music, arithmetic, geometry and astronomy are some of the key ways in which to examine this. And so with that, I'll end the video. Hope you enjoyed, hope you found something informative here, and have a good one.